What would you say would be the biggest lessons you learned from being a SEAL then? That just about life in general from your entire time there?
So I summarize that in one phrase: get off the X.
Get off the X.
Yeah. So and the X is any point of attack, any point of crisis, and that's one of the big things I talk about to companies and individuals. It is the sticking point in SEAL training and special operations lingo. The X was the point of the attack. It was the ambush point. So for one side of my career, I had trained to try and put the enemy on the X, and that X is a specific point that usually we pick ahead of time that will channelize them into an area that it makes it very difficult for them to get out of, and then we rain as much firepower and explosives to try and A, destroy their will to fight, and B, destroy them or equipment or whatever else. And what I had learned also was if you're ever on the X, you have to get off the X as quickly as possible, because the longer you sit on it, the harder it is to get out of an ambush. So 2007, my gunfight, we survived because my teammates fought back and we were able to get off that X. I mean, it took a little while. We had to use the air assets. My teammates fought back, but that's what enabled me to be successful out of that gunfight. When we got to the hospital, or when I got to the hospital, I kind of realized that I had stepped out of one ambush into another ambush.
An emotional, psychological ambush.
Absolutely. And this journey that I was facing. And I remember when the doctors were telling me, we're thinking about amputating your arm and it's going to take years to put you together. I felt like, man, it's no longer the bombs and bullets of battle. It's the bombs and bullets of life.
Wow.
And everybody gets hit by those bombs and bullets. So it took a couple of years for that all to come into clarity, but it made me realize everybody gets ambushed in life, everyone. And everybody gets stuck on that X. And that X is insidious. It's like quicksand. And the more you want to feel sorry for yourself, and that's what happens. When people get on the X, three things happen. Number one, we will look back at what we've lost. And we waste a lot of time at, a little bit like I did. Well, what if I had moved this way? Or what if I had moved that way? Or I want back my life before I got wounded because it was so much better. And we waste a lot of time doing that. We also look forward. Well, I was supposed to be this, or I was supposed to be that, or this was supposed to be my most successful year, or, I was going to play in the NFL. This was my launch point, and we get bitter about that. And then the last one is we look for someone or something to blame. It was their fault. They did this or they didn't do this. And that is the victim mindset. That pins us to the X. And what happens is, in a gunfight, you literally can physically die. But in life, I watch people who mentally and emotionally die.
Yes.
And I write this in the book Overcome, that there are people who that life ambush that hits them becomes the excuse for everything in their life.
For decades.
And they become lesser individuals than they ever were before. Like alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, every bad behavior is justified because of what happened to them. And they just lay on the X and they're just a dead person walking.
So when you made that conscious decision to make that sign and kind of create a mission statement for yourself to recover in a more positive state, what shifted for you and what shifted for the people around you that you weren't claiming to be a victim?
Yeah, it was just nothing but positivity. And don't get me wrong, I had hard times. There were definitely days that were hard. It was not, it's not blue skies and rainbows every day, but it is a choice. It doesn't mean that it's a choice to keep driving forward. And my wife, who I call the long-haired admiral, is amazing. But she's trying to raise 3 young kids. And really, I felt like this 4th kid, because who was cleaning my wounds? Who was grinding up my medicine? Who was feeding me through, grinding up food so that I could eat through a stomach tube? It was my wife. I was in a wheelchair when they brought me home. Yeah. I had all this metal and hardware, helping me clean this trach that I wore for 7 months and 2 days. So the last thing I was going to do was add additional stress to her by complaining or by, and not only that, I want to set the example to my kids. Like, hey, bad things happen to good people. But by complaining and being negative, you are not helping the situation in any way whatsoever. And this is something I talk to people about in this idea of leading always. When it sucks the worst, nobody needs to hear about it because all you're doing is pulling others down. And it is a virus. It is a cancer when it occurs, because usually when a team is at a point in time where people are starting to turn inward and feel sorry and eat themselves, you're at a tipping point. And this is when a great leader can step up and step out of his own misery to try and lead others forward, to push you in the right direction, or you will fall in the other direction. And that's, I wanted to show my kids and others that I wasn't going to be that guy. I was going to continue to drive forward no matter what.
That's powerful. Lead yourself, lead others, lead always. For those who are looking to accomplish their goals, but they feel stuck in life, what would you say were the strategies of the SEALs in accomplishing your goals at the highest level? What are some of the things that you guys did strategy-wise to make that happen?
Structure and discipline. So muscle memory would be the biggest one, which is now many of the things that I teach in both Overcome and in my Point Man for Life program. And it was something that I was missing. I felt like I was missing when I left the military. And I think a lot of military members feel the same way. The SEAL teams are incredibly effective at what we do for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is selection. So, and that selection is, there's a lot of things you have to do to qualify just to get to SEAL training. A lot of people don't realize how smart SEALs have to be. So there's a level of intelligence, there's a level of physical ability, there's a level of obviously resiliency that has to come into this. And then we put everybody through this meat grinder called SEAL training that eliminates anybody that doesn't have that ability. And then once you get to the SEAL team, it's how we train and build teams. And it's forged through tremendous adversity, because our training, even once you get to a team, is designed to be very hard. I mean, some people would say almost sadistic in the way we would train. We would look for what is the absolute worst case scenario we can think of, and then how do we amplify that just a little more
to make it even more
to make it even worse. And
then train from that.
And then train from that. And it was grueling and painful. And sometimes we got guys killed in training. I mean, you try to reduce the level of risk, but we also recognize that in order to be ready for combat, we have to train at the highest level. So, and in order to do that, it was a lot of repetition. And crawl, walk, run was the mentality. And it was not these big goals of, hey, I'm going to take down this entire town, like, right off the bat, because that's really complicated. That starts to get into all kinds of very complicated things. It was, how do I take down a single room? And we walk as we flow through it. And then it became, well, how do I take 2 rooms? How do I take 3 rooms? How do I take a house? How do I take a compound of 3 houses? How do I take a village? So it was a crawl, walk, run mentality all the time. And then structure and discipline in the way we trained. Everything was built up that way from shooting. Oftentimes I was a marksmanship instructor and I've trained some other people to shoot, and they're a little funny because the very first thing to do when I train anybody to shoot is you shoot at the, at the 3-yard line. A little black dot, and we're shooting at the 3-yard line. And they're like, hey man, this is stupid. I'm like, no, you're not. You're learning, and the repetition that you need to effectively pull your weapon out and get a positive sight picture, trigger squeeze, release that round, second sight picture, and follow through, so that we can do that over and over and over again until, at whatever point, you're shooting from 50, 100 yards or
more. Yeah.
So all of that comes together to create small victories and repetition, structure, and discipline that all come together to be successful.
How does someone create that for themselves when they're not in the military?
So that's...
Or not on a sports team?
When I left, so what I began to realize, so Overcome, when I wrote The Trident, which was my first book, it was just the story. It's my story of a young punk kid who did well enough to become an officer or a leader, and then totally failed because of ego and arrogance, got a second chance, and then redeemed himself, and then got wounded and kind of realized there was another level of leadership. And when people would read that, people would say, how'd you do that? And I couldn't definitively answer that question. So Overcome became, I mean, Overcome came out in, I think 5 years after I wrote the Trident, because it took that long to kind of think about what enabled that. And a lot of that had to do with when I got out of the military, I missed that structure and discipline. I missed, you know, a lot of people don't understand that the military is sometimes a really simple existence,
Very.
especially when you're deployed. Like when you're in the combat zone, it's a very simple existence. You eat,
Sleep.
you sleep, you work
yeah,
out,
yeah.
and then you train and conduct missions.
That's it.
And you're worried about the guys around you. And the real world's really complicated. There's all these distractions. There's no one that gives you the guidance. No one hands you a mission and says, hey man, this is what you're doing today.
You got to figure out your own mission.
Exactly. And as I got out, I realized that I had to figure out my own mission. And all these things were not there. So I started with, okay, so how was I successful coming out of these injuries? Because that's what everybody wanted to see. How were you so positive? How'd you write that sign on the door? How'd you, you know, less than a year and a half after your injuries, launch a nonprofit? How did you, you know, later create your own speaking company and all these things? And I realized that I was super balanced as a leader when I was wounded.
When you were wounded.
When I was wounded. I wasn't prior to being wounded.
Really?
And not when I had the leadership failure. And at other points in crisis in my life, I realized I wasn't as balanced.
I think I saw one of your videos recently talking about like the key to successful leadership is balance.
It is. I believe it. But balance is a misnomer too, because it's not like, well, I put 20% in this bucket, and this bucket, and this bucket. I teach something called the Pentagon of Peak Performance. So 5 key areas that a leader should be balanced in. The foundational level is physical leadership. And it's something that I've come to find that all of us as we get older have a tendency to let slide. We do the opposite of probably what we should be doing.
Just be going harder and
Yeah, because as we get older, we're breaking down,
Yeah.
and we need to take care of ourselves better than we do when we're younger, where your body's so much more resilient. And that's why I tell people, as a leader, you need a lot of energy. You need to be able to think clearly. You need, you know, sound mind in everything that you're doing. So that foundational level of physical leadership is critical to what you're doing, and that consists of sleep, nutrition, and fitness. So those 3 components. And my physical leadership saved my life when I was wounded. Now, for most people, hopefully, you're never at that level. But in some ways, right now, you look at today, you know, COVID's kind of a strange thing, but for the most part, you know, it is individuals who are not healthy that are having the greatest problems.
Right.
And those with a stronger immune system seem to be doing better.
Absolutely.
And it's like that with other diseases.
Right, right.
So once again, physical leadership, to have the energy and the ability, we manage stress better. So that's the foundational level. Number 2 was mental leadership. And when I became a junior officer, and I was super arrogant, I really thought I knew everything. And I didn't challenge my beliefs. I didn't question my own capabilities. You know, do as I say, not as I do. I didn't do things to get out of my comfort zone. And those are the things that make up mental leadership. Constantly educating ourselves,
Yes.
constantly challenging our beliefs. We're in a day and age where it's dangerous, in my opinion, because social media feeds you the information that you like to see. And so many people don't go seek out, they don't challenge that belief system of what they're being fed.
Right.
So it only furthers their belief in things that may or may not be true, but because you keep clicking on that line of thought, you're being fed all that information. The news is no different. The media, people watch what they like to see, and it's very biased in this day and age. So mental leadership is constantly challenging your beliefs. It's doing your due diligence to find out what's really true and how does it play into who I am and what I'm trying to do. It's getting outside of your comfort zone. It's finding the individuals who are where you want to be, and identifying them as mentors so you can be better, so that you're not surrounding yourself with individuals who are pulling you away from where you want to go.
Right.
Number three, and this is the biggest one and my weakest point, and that's something I've found about the Pentagon. Most people have one area that they're super strong naturally, and then they have an area where they're super weak. And my weakest area was emotional leadership. And emotional leadership is our ability to maintain, as a leader, it's critical to be even keeled. We're not too hot, we're not too cold, we're not too excited, we're not too angry. Because people can count on you with that consistency. They know as a leader, I can come to you and tell you bad news, and you're going to take it well. And I can come to you and tell you amazing news, and you're not going to burn it down drinking and be an idiot.
Right.
You got to ride that balance. And I really struggle with that because I was an emotional roller coaster when I was younger. And I came to realize that really damaged my credibility as a leader.
Yes.
And it's also choosing that positivity in the face of negativity. Nobody wants that leader that is just an emotional train wreck, or a negative Nelly. They want that leader who they can count on, that's positive, that's going to push you forward. They also don't want that leader that's something I call a leadership wrecking ball. A leader who they're all about the result, but they leave a path of destruction behind them. They'll crush you in their path to get things done. And that, in my opinion, is weak emotional leadership also. I mean, as a leader, we got to think about the others.
Yeah, the health of others, yes.
And then
Number four?
and the last point, the last part of emotional leadership is managing our mouths. Because
Our mouth?
Our mouth.
Yes.
Yeah, because so many people...
So true.
So many people... And I was guilty of this, and I'm not impervious to this. Like I said, this is my weakest area, but I'm really aware of myself now, because when we let that zinger fly, 90% of the time, it doesn't do anything to further what we're trying to accomplish as a leader. All it does is massages our ego. Well, I was angry in the moment, so I wanted to say this. I see this in relationships all the time. Husband and wife that let these zingers fly. It does nothing to further that situation in a positive way.
No.
Other than maybe making you feel good to attack people who disagreed with. And that's part of being a leader also.
Right.
That people are going to disagree with you. So what? If you have conviction in who you are, it's just going to happen. I mean, in this world. And that is the moment that a leader in those hardest moments, in the storm, in the face of that, has to step up and lead. That's where we lead always.
Yeah.
It is in those hard moments. It's when nothing is going right, everybody's miserable, that you have to step up and lead. And that's what's critical.